When I think of Austin brewing history, I would focus on brewpubs. Brewpubs were something that were very active back in the early 90s already up in the Pacific Northwest, but yet here in the state of Texas, it was a very unknown area. Folks didn't understand what a brewpub was.
We were trying to get brewpubs legalized because we knew that having a retail component was really key to long-term success of the Texas craft beer industry. Just because it's, at that time particularly, was so much easier to get people to come in to a brew pub than it was to get craft beer on the shelf. So we introduced a law in '87 that would allow brew pubs to exist in Texas. At the time, being naive, we sort of asked for the moon, thought we could get everything, self-distribution, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, the wholesale beer distributors decided that that was not in their best interest. So another couple of sessions passed. I actually decided after 2 more sessions of trying to make it happen that it just wasn't going to take in Texas. Had it not been for Billy Forrester picking up the ball after I decided just to set it down, we wouldn't have brew pubs in Texas.
I was returning from the Great American Beer Festival, October of 1992, with Steve Anderson. I said, Steve, I think we've seen the future for beer in Texas and especially in Austin. And Steve had a background in home brewing already. And I said, I think you need to go to the Siebel Institute, and I'll go up on the Hill and change the law.
Billy was working with legislators, talking with them, and dealing with the wholesalers who were always an impediment to getting the law changed.
Who I worked with were the wholesale beer distributors of Texas, who everyone else perceived being our biggest enemy. And I guess in a way they were, but I felt like if we found a way to find out what they would tolerate, then we had a better chance. And the main thing I learned very quickly, they didn't want a brew pub to be able to brew and distribute. That's where they drew the line. And so once we agreed not to distribute, and it took some work, because as we got the bill introduced, people around the state kept trying to hook distribution on it. So I defended my bill almost every night in some committee somewhere. And Governor Ann Richards signed it in May of '93, became law September 1st, '93.
And that was the first major legislation that had changed in Texas for craft brewing since Prohibition, probably. When you could actually, a restaurant could sell its beer legally as a brewery in its restaurant, as a brew pub. So that was Waterloo, they were the first ones.
It took a long time for people to get it. I think some did get it, but I think a lot of people didn't get it.
Our advertising was what kind of brew pub we were, not what a brew pub was. And I made the assumption that everyone here in Austin was savvy about a brew pub was. I missed it. And so we're about 6 months into it, and you know, people walk in and see the tank. Oh, y'all really make beer here?
It was a large building, it used to be Bradford Paint Company, and it was a 2-story concrete building, and it was kind of funky.
The acoustics in there were terrible. So it had the sound of a large beer hall, which some people found a bit offensive, but I found usually it drove people, it became exciting. And there was a sense of neighborhood, and Waterloo was always that way.
February or so of '94, the bitter end opened, and I ended up being their brewer there. Like a lot of people, switch from being a home brewer to a professional brewer, right? You have a real job, and somebody says, do you want to brew all the time? Yeah. Right. Do I get to drink beer during the day?
They had a sign in the window saying that they needed an assistant. I walked by and walked in and asked them if I could give them my resume, and they said they needed somebody to clean a tank right that minute. And so they hired me on the spot, and I just jumped into a tank and started cleaning it, and I had no experience with brewing at all.
They had just great food, and it kind of fit what is now the warehouse district better than Waterloo did, because the warehouse district became more and more high-end. They were great neighbors. They were like 2 blocks away from us, so if we needed to exchange yeast or anything like that, we'd just walk over there with a keg or something and pick it up.
We opened up Copper Tank in 1994, I believe, and we were just blowing and going. I mean, we were doing huge numbers. We actually had to bring in 2 new 30-barrel fermenters in like the first 3 months.
they were just bananas. They were working 14-hour days, and I think they were, I walked in there one day and they were like, okay, can you start tomorrow? 8 o'clock, all right, you're hired.
We're having to brew so fast, we didn't even have time to clean the fermenters with the CIP. I climbed in with Diversol and a brush and my brewery boots and scrubbed out the inside of the tanks and then rinsed it all down so we could get another batch of beer right into it.
Between those 3 brew pubs, I think early on, and then Celis, I think the craft market really developed in Austin. I really do believe we had some world-class beer back then.
You know, we were all kind of in it together. It wasn't like one person was competing against another. It was more about how do we educate the public at large.
Everybody's very helpful to each other. It wasn't a cutthroat. We felt very strongly about what we were doing, and we wanted Texans to have good craft beer, made fresh, delivered fresh at the same address.
Pretty shortly thereafter, there were at least 6 or 7 brew pubs that were kind of within walking distance of 6th and Congress. The Armadillo was down on 6th Street toward I-35 a little bit. Stonehouse, where Opal Divines now is. Lovejoy's, of course, was making beer.
Katie Bloom's and the Boar's Head Brewing Company and all these cool little brew pubs that they just didn't make it. It was a kind of a heady time. There was a lot going on, and there was certainly some variances in quality,
Very early on, it was a lot of people jumping in, and we didn't really have the experience yet. And there was just an awful lot of questionable beer being produced.
A consumer gets a hold of that, and they don't know that that's not how all craft beer is.
A lot of the consumers that went in thinking this was going to be fun and tasty, they'd start drinking bad beers and they'd be like, I'm not doing this. There was just a bunch of money sloshing around in the early 90s. It had a sort of a Wild West mentality. A lot of people thought they could get in and make a bunch of money.
They had almost like a big Las Vegas kind of let's gamble and do it and see how it happens kind of attitude, and it wasn't these people who are basically beer-obsessed individuals doing it.
Probably the highest example of that is the guys with Armadillo that had never been in the restaurant business, had never been in the beer business, had never brewed beer professionally. And yet, because they thought it was a cool idea, opened up a brew pub on 6th Street in Austin, Texas. And you can't, it's no way to run a railroad.
I think most of them were looking at the cost of goods in making beer on premise, and they're like, well, it's only going to cost me 3 cents an ounce, and I can sell a pint for $4.
Yeah, but that pot over there cost $1 million. So the first beer that came out there cost $1 million, and we're working down from there.
I think the people that did make it had the right idea. They had the niche. They were making good beer. They had enough backing to make it through a little, 5 or 6 months of slow time. So it's a combination of all those factors that kind of brought several brew pubs through.